Should write out a script, shouldn't I? Cody the Punished Fink here with a painting tutorial on how to do Robinson Rangers. Now, a little bit of unnecessary trivia, but I always was reading this as Robinson Raiders. Anyway, in this video I will explain my process of how I painted up my lance of Robinson Rangers, which I have right here in the background, fully painted up. These guys took me about 2 days, and I will stipulate it right now by saying that this tutorial is going to be a little bit airbrush heavy. I know not a lot of people have an airbrush. I know people hate it when they look up tutorials on how to paint stuff and they say, oh, break out an airbrush. But I paid some top dollar for this little machine. It is a Grex. Now, granted, as any airbrush could probably do, it doesn't have to be my model airbrush. It doesn't have to be any high tier one. What you want is something that you can control the flow of air and how much is getting sent out there. I have a dual trigger setup, and honestly a single trigger probably won't be half bad either. I just like the control about this and personal preference, and it's the only airbrush I know. But with that being said, we'll get into it. Alright, the first step that what I'm doing here is I'm making the base. The first color I have is Sahara Yellow, and we're just getting a good saturation with that color all the way around the base. Next, we're just going to do a dry brushing of Sol Yellow. Here I am just spraying on Turbo Dork's Afterburner at an angle just to catch the top of all the rocks, to hopefully give a look of tiny particles of gold or fool's gold on the sand. Lastly, we have the rocks for these bases. Now, these were just some plaster of Paris that had dried up from a previous project that wasn't used. And I'm just going to base coat this in graphene gray. Now, once we have that graphene gray on the rocks, we can go in and use a makeup brush that I have. It's a really good thing to use for dry brushing. I'm just dry brushing on graphite, which is a lighter gray, and it's going to help all that texture really stand out, hopefully. Lastly, for the rocks, we have Agrax Earthshade, and we're just going to cover the entire rocks in it and let it dry. And that's going to get into all the recesses and show dirt accumulation and shadow and really sell it. Then lastly, we just glued the mechs onto the base. This is a little bit later in the process of painting these guys, but you can do it anytime. Now with my base coat of orange, I go over and I cover the entire model in scale 75 blood red. Once I have that established, we'll can move into the next step.
So these models were primed and base coated beforehand. I used Scale 75 white surface primer, and then I base coated it all with Mars orange. And then, like I said previously, after we have that, I just use blood red and try to get an orangey red look to the model.
The next step of this process is using my airbrush to draw in a camo pattern. Now with this, I'm not trying to be entirely exact. The reason why I wanted to use an airbrush instead of just using a regular brush to do this is I really want to get more practice in airbrush control. That being able to lay down paint where I want it, when I want it, and how I want it. And so this is really more so a practice of skill with me than anything else. You can do this paint scheme with a brush, no problem. But doing it like this with an airbrush did save me a lot of time. And all I'm doing is I'm just drawing in little lines.
And here you can see me using the airbrush to just do that camo pattern. It's really just a bunch of squiggly lines, and then you just get rougher in areas that you think you need to fill it out more and add more definition to that camo pattern. And by the end of it, it should look a little something like this. And here we are just putting the black over that white. Now, the reason why I did it like this is because if you look at Robinson Rangers, they have a paint scheme of red with a black camo pattern over it. Now, sometimes that can get lost in the model, and I wanted to have this white border to really highlight and accentuate that camo pattern that we're putting all this effort into, so that way it doesn't get lost in the model.
Now, once I'm done with that black over the white, I go back with a brush and I add little white specks here and there across the black to kind of help even more so break up that camo pattern and just sell it a little bit more. I also add some white specks here and there amongst the red where I didn't initially airbrush it on. Alright, and once we're done with the camo pattern, we can start to go in and do the rest of this model with only brushes. Now, the thing that I'm going to do next is edge highlights.
The edge highlights done on this model was actually orange. So I'm using Kalahara orange, and then I'm following that up with Mars orange, which was the same color that we used as the base. And we're just using this Mars orange on the very tips to give that extra little touch of highlights, because the Kalahar orange is quite dark. So you need that Mars orange to really stand out. All right, next little bit that we're doing here is the metallics. So the metallics that I'm using on the weapons and any sort of mechanical surface, such as the hip joints, actuators, uh, the jump jets and the jump jet funnels, just to really break up that model. And I'm using scale 75 black metal, and then I'm highlighting it with heavy metal. And I'm just doing that on the edges and any round surface to add a sort of a glare reflection onto the metal and really make it pop.
Now we go into the cockpit join. For this one, I actually did a dual reflection. And Forgotten Wrong in chat was kind enough to actually push me to do this. So for this, I'm going yellow, and then I'm going to go to green.
So I start with a darkened down Sahara yellow with smoke black from AK series, and I do that as the base, and then I go from Sahara yellow up to Soul yellow, just slowly mixing them in. Then for the green Julian, I go from Afreen Jade all the way up to Spring Green. It's, again, just mixing that Spring Green in until it's slowly but surely with each layer to give a nice transition and a Julian effect. And with that same green, I use it on the medium lasers and any other weapons like that. I did miss doing a blue for the large laser of the Axemen, but I can always do that later. And here you go. Here is the model all finished. All the highlights, jeweling, metallics. The only thing that it's missing is some tufts. I am looking at getting a kind of turquoise and blue and very light green to really accent and contrast with the red of the model.
Alright, so hopefully I was able to edit this into a way that it actually made sense. Now, I was going to stream my whole process of me recording this, but that'd just been a fucking of a nightmare to try and do my step-by-step process for the voiceover and everything else like that. Anyway, this is how I did my House Davion Robinson Rangers. And I'm really happy with the outlook. And sadly, I didn't get to play these. And the one thing on the Axeman, I did mess up and didn't do the lens jewel for the large laser on that mech. But for what it's worth, thank you for suffering through this entire mess of a video. I'm still trying to figure out how to do this whole thing. And hopefully, as time goes on, I get a little bit better with making these. So for those of you that stuck around to the very end, thank you, and I hope that I see you in the next video. Bye.